At 40 years old, my life has veered in a direction I never would have predicted. Rebecca has 2 children from her former marriage, Zach, who is 10, and Chloe, who is 8. I have been married to her 5 years. From my last marriage, Lucy is my daughter. She is 7, and at least I thought mixing our families was working really nicely. Our typical ups and downs were nothing unusual. That was until one night everything changed. It was simply Tuesday night, ordinary. The kids were at the dinner table when I arrived home from work. I took a seat. Rebecca grinned at me and we started talking about our day as usual. I assumed it was a joke for a while until Zach suddenly turned to me full in the eye and stated, "You hit me!" Children say the most unusual things occasionally. First I dismissed it, then asked him what he meant. Zach, though, wasn't pulling a joke. I was shocked when he kept his ground and said I had hit him a few days previously while Rebecca was not home. I have never even touched Zach, or any child for that matter. Simply said it is not me. I absolutely never felt the need to smack him. I do not believe in such form of punishment. "No, I didn't," I answered him, then looked to Rebecca to have her support back up, but she didn't. Rather, she simply sat there, staring between Zach and me as if she were sorting it out. And then I realized she believed him. The space seemed as though it was closing in on you, my pulse thumping in my chest, a mix of terror and incredulity seized over me. How would you counter such a lie? How can one validate something they did not do? Just Zach's word against mine, and right in front of my eyes, Rebecca's confidence in me was disintegrating, rising from the table. "Are you serious?" I questioned her. "You think I hit your kid?" Rebecca avoided answering me straightforwardly. She stated instead, "We need to talk about this." We headed into the living room, leaving the children seated at the table. Her shutting of the door behind us started the actual questioning. She questioned me straightforwardly. "Did you hit him?" I assured her once more, "No, I didn't." She wasn't sure. She persisted, wondering why Zach would create anything like that if it wasn't real. I came up short with an answer. "Not yet. Perhaps he was trying for attention. Perhaps he was unhappy about something else." All I knew was that although it didn't seem to matter, I hadn't done what he was accusing me of. Rebecca wasn't sure she trusted me. The more defensive I grew, the worse things got. She was in full-on mama bear, and I felt like the enemy. I could no more stand it. I took a quick picture. "I'm not staying here if you think I'm some kind of abuser, Rebecca. I'm not risking my life or Lucy's life over this." I rushed out of the house, my mind racing. Though I had no clue where to go, I had to leave there. Pacing back and forth the street, I attempted to make sense of what had just transpired while phoning my closest buddy, Dan. Dan was not having it. He is a straightforward type of man. "You have to get the hell out of there," he advised. I wanted not to go. My family and I lived here. Nonetheless, Dan was correct. That really got me. "Look, nobody's going to trust you over a kid. It's not fair, but that's the truth. And should things go south, you may lose Lucy." I had not even given it any thought in that manner. But once Dan spoke it, the idea stayed with me. What would happen if Zach turned double down? Assuming he leveled further charges, what would happen? Should Rebecca visit the police? Zach's word would be against mine. And how may that turn out? Though it felt like my whole life was disintegrating, after spending what felt like hours strolling around the block, I realized what I had to do. When I returned to the house, Rebecca was seated in the living room looking blankly ahead. Zach had turned in for bed. I set her down trying to remain cool, but inwardly I was shivering. I didn't punch him. Rebecca stared at me like I'd just smacked her. I don't know why he's saying that, and at this point I don't care why. What I do care about is that I don't feel safe here. "Safe? What do you mean you don't feel safe?" Rebecca asked me. "I mean, if you don't believe me now, how long until Zach says something worse? What if he makes another accusation? Something that could ruin my life or take Lucy away from me?" I could sense she understood I was right. I packed a suitcase for Lucy and myself. I tried to remain calm and told her I knew she wanted to protect her son, but I wasn't going to wait around for the next allegation. Rebecca said nothing to get me stopped. She seemed to be still in shock. I told her, "We can talk later, but for now, only text me," as I was leaving the door. She nodded, but I didn't turn around. That night, Lucy and I remained at my parents' place. I told her only that we were spending some time with Grandma and Grandpa. I did not tell her the complete story. but I stayed awake, unable to go asleep. My head kept going back over the exchange, wondering how a lie had destroyed everything. My marriage, my house, gone exactly as that. The days after my departure were among the worst of my life. Between Rebecca and me, everything stopped, which just made things worse. We said very little at all. She would send the odd text, but every time my phone rang, my stomach dropped. I had no idea what to anticipate. Perhaps more charges, perhaps more uncertainty. Rebecca's texts first seemed to be all over the place, like everyone might be another kick to the gut. She was furious one minute and then apologizing. She would then beg to meet and discuss things by sending a protracted text wall. It was taxing. Although I read them, most of the time I didn't react immediately away. Why would one want to circle around? Not a single thing had changed. When it counted most, she still didn't trust me. The oddest thing was how quickly she turned from blaming me to blaming herself. She seemed to be unable to decide. She originally focused mostly on shielding Zach and demanding responses from me. It didn't matter to me at the time when she suddenly began to doubt her own responses and say things like, maybe I overreacted or I didn't think it through. She attempted to undo, but I couldn't just forget the way she had looked at me when Zach accused me. Once it exists, that type of uncertainty does not vanish on its own. It persists. I kept going back over the scene in my thoughts, the way she questioned me like I was guilty until proven innocent and neglected me. After that, how was I meant to resume cohabiting with her? I battled this unworkable scenario for several weeks. I missed Rebecca, but every time I considered going back, all I could see was that instant when she sided with Zach. It stayed on a loop in my head and eluded me to turn off. I knew I had to guard myself, but it didn't stop the emotional whiplash of trying to decide whether leaving was the best thing to do. Lucy adjusted better than I expected, which was a comfort. She asked only a reasonable number of questions, and I provided few justifications. She appeared to understand when I informed her we were temporarily lodging with Grandma and Grandpa. Children are resilient in ways we hardly credit them for. Taking her to the park, helping her with her homework, and engaging her in activities as nothing had changed, I maintained things as usual as I could for her. Inside, though, my life was falling apart. Regarding Rebecca, her texts continued arriving, but their desperation grew as the days went by. She persisted in saying things like, "I miss you," and "We can fix this," but I wasn't convinced anything could be corrected. How can you simply go by something like that? How would you act as though it never happened since the trust has been destroyed? My bottom line was, I'm not coming back until I know it's safe for Lucy and me. I told her the same thing again and over. On a maybe, I cannot gamble Lucy's or my future. No matter how much I missed her, I couldn't go back to a time when I was always watching over my shoulder, waiting for the next bogus allegation to drop. Trust doesn't suddenly slip back into place like nothing happened. Then perhaps 3 weeks after I left, Rebecca messaged me and I froze. Not like any other book she had sent. One of a kind was this. All stated was, "I believe you now." I had to read it several times to be sure I wasn't dreaming it. Rebecca then went on to say that she had begun considering what Zach had said once I left. She started to observe oddities in things. Little details changed every time she queried him about his tale, which had begun to evolve. Her pressing of him revealed further contradictions. She eventually came to see Zach had been lying the entire time. I should have felt relief. Right here was the moment I had been waiting for. But I felt just rage rather than relief. Furious even. She now thought like me. Now once I had already departed and everything had collapsed, when that uncertainty really counted, where was it? Where was that critical thinking when she was challenging if I could hit her son and looking me down? Over and over in her texts, Rebecca corrected herself, saying she was sorry for not trusting me and that she wanted things corrected. She urged me to return home. I wasn't sure though things could be corrected. How can you get back from that? When the person you considered trustworthy was so fast to mistrust you, how do you proceed? Though I knew I had to reply, I wasn't sure what to say. Now that she believed me, I could not simply pretend everything was good. It was much more than simply the lie Zach told. It was about her belief in something so grave, so harmful about me without second thought. My faith in her had been dashed. I wrote her back and said, "I'm delighted you believe me now, but I can't risk this happening again." To be honest, I also lack faith in you. I trust Zach only." Her statement was sad. I cannot live in a place where I am always fearing being accused of something I did not commit. She stated she would do anything to make things right and asked me what she may do to mend it. But I doubt if anything could. She then asked me a question that really took me off guard. "Do you want me to grant Zach and Chloe custody?" I had never given the concept much thought before, not even given it much thought. But since she stated it, the idea persisted. I wouldn't have to worry about another unfounded charge if Zach wasn't living in the house. But if I asked Rebecca to sacrifice her children for me, what sort of person would I be? I told her I loved her, and I did, in a sense. But I also told her I cannot live in that house with her children anymore. I was not sure about it. I had no faith in them. I made it plain I wasn't expecting her to relinquish custody of Zach and Chloe. But if things continued the same, there was no path ahead for us. It was an untenable scenario, and I knew no matter what someone was going to lose. When I sent it, I had no idea how she would respond. Is she likely to be furious, wounded, beg me to change my mind? But what she said next was something I never saw coming. Rebecca mentioned she had considered relinquishing custody of Zach and Chloe so we could live together. I looked shocked. This was not a fleeting observation. She took her business seriously. Though it didn't seem right, she wanted to make it work that much. How could I let her do that, really? Though Zach had lied, her children needed her. If our relationship were based on anything like that, what type of relationship would it be? Deep down, I realized it was a no-win scenario. Once Rebecca informed me she was seriously thinking of relinquishing custody of Zach and Chloe, I felt unsure about how to react. One side of me felt an unusual sense of relief. Perhaps there was a way to undo all of this. But the other side of me felt horrible, as though I were a monster just considering it. Rebecca never wanted to part with her children for me. That wasn't the answer I was seeking for, and to be honest, I didn't believe it was the appropriate course of action for anybody engaged. Rebecca's serious consideration of it rocked me. She obviously was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to retain me in her life, and I couldn't make sense of it. This concerned her children, not some little choice. Should she give them up for me, what sort of future would we find? And should their mother choose me over Zach and Chloe, how would they feel? A few days passed and I was still sorting things. It seemed like a whole different degree of disarray. We remained messaging, but I kept some distance. Rebecca's ex-husband Kyle noticed what was happening and, let's say, he wasn't thrilled about it. Out of nowhere, one day I received a call from a number I did not know. Though something urged me to pick up, I almost didn't respond. I attempted to calmly explain the circumstances, but Kyle was not having it. His voice was pure rage, and honestly, I could not blame him. Why the hell is Rebecca talking about giving up custody of Zach and Chloe? What the hell is going on in your house? Zach accused me of something that didn't not happen, and now everything's falling apart. I never wanted Rebecca to give up custody, but I can't go back to that house after what happened. Kyle stopped momentarily to piece everything together. "So, Zach lied?" he inquired at last, his voice somewhat subdued. "Yeah, that's the essence of it," I replied. Kyle sighed long ago. Rebecca believed him at first, but she knows now it was all made up. But the trust is broken. I can't live there with Zach and Chloe after this. I felt for a moment that he might explode up once more, but instead he sounded tired. "I can't believe Zach did this. He's a good kid, but something's been off with him lately. He's been acting out, but this is beyond anything I imagined." I had no comment. I neither knew why Zach had lied, nor was a therapist or mind reader. I knew only that his falsehood had wrecked everything. To his credit, Kyle did not escalate matters anymore. I was actually relieved to hear him say, "Look, I don't want my kids caught in this mess any more than you do. But Rebecca giving up custody? That's not happening. Rebecca should not proceed with something she would regret for the rest of her life. That last thing I wanted." We decided to drop it at that for the moment, and I hung up like I had just avoided a bullet. The truth was, though, nothing had truly been resolved. A few days later, Rebecca texted me once more, requesting a personal meeting. She wanted to talk personally, not books or back-and-forth correspondence. I doubted my readiness for that. Seeing her personally, following all that had transpired, seemed too raw. We could not, however, keep running away from one another indefinitely. I agreed, since we had to face the mess head-on at some time, and met in a park midway between our old house and my parents' place. Rebecca was already staring into space on a bench when I arrived. She appeared to have missed days of sleep. Her red eyes reflected a defeated look about her that tightened my chest. Uncertain of what to say, I sat down next to her, leaving a little distance between us. She said, "I'm losing everything," her voice hardly above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore." I didn't know how to reply, for what was there to say? I too felt as though I had already lost everything. I sighed, tried to control my feelings by rubbing my hands together. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I didn't want it to be like this." Her words really hit me. "I can't believe my own son lied like that. I can't even look at him right now. He's staying with Kyle full-time, and I don't know when I'll see him again." Rebecca in this state did not appeal to me. Zach's lie had destroyed her life as much as split mine. Though I felt for her, I couldn't overlook the way she had quickly questioned me. I didn't know what to say, since she didn't trust me when I most needed it, and that kind of wound doesn't heal overnight. Rebecca wiped her eyes, then inhaled, not with Zach in the picture, but rather, "I don't think there's anything to fix here. I can't come back." Then she dropped a bombshell I never would have seen. "I'm pregnant." I froze, my head whirling. Pregnancy related? Given all this upheaval, how could she be pregnant right now? "How far along are you?" I asked at last. 12 weeks. "I just found out a few days ago. I didn't know how to react." The whole matter seemed to have become 100 times more convoluted. Here we were, already juggling a divorce, a bogus allegation, and now a baby on her way. "I'm scared, okay?" Rebecca's voice cracked with obvious desperation in her eyes. For a minute I felt guilty. "I don't want to go through this alone. I'm sorry for everything, for not believing you, for all of it, but please don't leave me now." Perhaps I was divorcing her. Maybe, in spite of all, I should be there for her through this. And then I realized, though, why we had started in this mess. This transcended Rebecca's pregnancy or any one person. It was about defending Lucy and myself as well. "I'm sorry. I couldn't put them at risk." My voice was husky. Rebecca's face crumpled, and for the first time in a long time, I watched her truly fall apart. "But I can't do this. I can't come back and pretend everything's fine just because you're pregnant. We're still getting a divorce." She started to cry. I simply sat there, not sure what to do. Though I knew I had to keep my position, I felt like the worst person on earth. After what felt like an eternity, we sat in quiet. I couldn't risk returning to a scenario where another allegation may ruin me. Neither of us knew quite what to say. I got up at last to tell her I had to leave. She refused to attempt to stop me. She realized I believed that things were beyond repair. I became numb walking back to my car. With this was it. There were no second chances or a backwards trip. My family was broken and my marriage was finished. The following several days went in a haze. After our park rendezvous, Rebecca and I hardly spoke. When we returned to messaging, the tone had changed. Apologues and urgent requests vanished from the scene. Rather, Rebecca appeared resigned, as though she had at last realized our marriage was indeed finished. Reality started to sink in the days following our park encounter. The divorce was happening, not some far-off event hovering about. Rebecca and I were negotiating the end of our marriage, not fixing things anymore. All seemed strange. The paperwork was moving ahead. 5 years of marriage had seen everything collapse so rapidly. Though I knew it had to happen, it made acceptance more difficult. One morning, the legal divorce papers showed up. Perched in the kitchen, I fixed my gaze on the envelope. Though I had been anticipating it, when it did show up, it struck harder than I had anticipated. The life I had been working for with Rebecca seemed formally finished, sealed and done. I opened the mail not straight away. Rather, I set it on the counter and tried to concentrate on Lucy. Lucy had been my lighthouse over all of this. Though I could see she felt something was odd, she was adjusting really nicely. Lucy was no different. Youngsters are far more perceptive than we would have you believe. She knew only that her mother and I were going to be living apart coming forward. She knew not the whole situation. She kept asking whether we were still visiting the park, like she was trying to see if things was still normal, so I hadn't known how to tell her beyond that. That day, "We will go, no matter what," I assured her. While my own life seemed to be disintegrating, Keeping things consistent for her became my first concern. Lucy only needed to know I was there for her. She had no need for specifics. Rebecca was juggling her own mess at the time. She was quite pregnant just now, the kid just a few weeks from birth. From what she told me in messages, Zach's relationship had totally crumbled. Rebecca had not seen or spoken with Zach in weeks. He had moved in with Kyle full-time. She tried to get in touch, but Zach was not answering. Though things between us were finished, I could sense the suffering in her letters and grieved for her as he seemed to have shut her out entirely. Especially under this kind of circumstances, no parent should be deprived of their bond with their child. But I could not do anything. I was not going to get involved. This was between Rebecca and Zach. Rebecca even made a few hints that I may attempt to mend things by talking to Zach, but I turned that down right away. "That's between you and he," I said to her. "I can't get involved in that." Zach had made his decisions, and I wasn't going to walk back into that mess. Rebecca had to cope with the fallout from believing him. Today their relationship was in shambles. Watching from a distance was difficult, knowing there was nothing I could do to assist. But it was no more my place. My attention had to remain on Lucy and on forward. When Rebecca's due date at last arrived, it was among the most unusual events of my life. I had been close by Rebecca's side the whole time, holding her hand during the birth and savoring every minute with Lucy. I can't convey how weird that felt, knowing that my child was being delivered, yet I was sitting at my parents' house waiting for a text message to indicate it was done. I continued pacing about, waiting for any form of news by checking my phone every 5 minutes. At last, after 3 a.m, I received the text. "He's here." The lad was there. I had not been there to witness my son's birth. A little later, Rebecca emailed me a photo of him wrapped in one of those small hospital blankets, wearing a small cap on his head. He looked great, but I was absent to hear his first scream and to touch him. The delight of fatherhood once more was tinged with a great feeling of loss. The first few weeks following the birth of my kid were challenging. I had already missed so much. He was just a few hours old. Rebecca and I were working on co-parenting, but it proved difficult. I had Lucy to consider. I was not living there anymore. Back and forth regarding when I could visit the infant, how often I would be involved, and what was fair to everyone emerged. Though it was embarrassing, I went over a couple times. We were clearly in conflict with one another. We cannot ignore it. Though the truth was that everything had changed, we were both striving for civility. We were divorced parents attempting to raise a child and negotiate our new lives apart, not just parents anymore. I will never forget the first time I held my kid. He was so little, and all I could focus on was the previously missed amount. Though it felt unattainable from a distance, I wanted to be there for him, the parent he needed. Already difficult enough, co-parenting with Lucy now included a newborn in the mix. Rebecca was still dealing with the consequences from Zach's deceit. She was suffering, and Zach was not speaking with her. She attempted to disguise it, but I could see she was physically and emotionally tired. She was trying to mend things with Zach, parenting a newborn, and managing being a mother to Chloe, all too much for her. She was trying to hold it together, but I could see the cracks. We finally settled on a schedule, but it wasn't perfect. Most of the time I had Lucy, and I would visit to see the baby a couple of times a week. I felt as though I was only gathering fragments of my son's existence. I missed the everyday events, the benchmarks, the tiny moments, and it was difficult, even if I tried to embrace that this was our new normal. Lucy was a shining light throughout all of this, but I felt cut off, like I was seeing my kid grow up from the outside. She adopted being a big sister as second nature. She loved her infant brother, and watching her with him helped to somewhat clear the mess we were going through. Looking back on all that has transpired, it feels like a slow-motion train crash. She just cared about her newborn brother, not about the divorce or the custody schedule. One unfounded charge from Zach flipped my whole life upside down. Lying wrecked everything in my marriage, in my family, in my house. And here I am today, attempting to reconstruct something from the debris. Rebecca and I are still co-parents. It is not perfect, never will be. Zach is hardly visible in the photo, and the family we sought to mix has totally disintegrated. I have my kid though, and Lucy here. Though it's not the life I envisioned, I'm doing my best to make it work. It's odd how fast life can turn around. You feel you have everything under control one day, then you are attempting to put together what remains. Though I have no idea what the future contains, one thing is clear: I am still standing. For now, too, it is sufficient.